You want to go?
Sure. Hola, beautiful people, spiritual beings, warriors, whatever you want to identify with. Maria and Sam here from Branches. I know it's been a while since we've done a yin yang video, so here we are today showing up for you guys. I think we're going to talk today about compassion and also compassion fatigue because as former nurses, we know all about that. And Sam and I have been getting a lot of clients lately that are also healthcare workers, nurses that are definitely feeling the caregiver burnout and compassion fatigue. So this is what prompted us to make this video. Um, we'll start off probably maybe just talking about compassion in general. And maybe Sam, you want to just touch on how you recently had a client kind of ask you this?
Hello, people. We're glad to be doing a video again, both of us. Um, so I had a client today in my coaching who asked me, "What does compassion really mean?" And I sat there because compassion is something that I've always felt and sensed. I never had to explain. And there's all these things like, oh, have more compassion for yourself, like release the suffering, do this, have compassion. So when she asked me, what does compassion really mean? I'm like, this is a good question.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I even did a project in nursing school for my master's on compassion fatigue. And I've never even looked at like, what exactly is compassion?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what gave us the
Wow.
premise for this video.
Yes.
Um, and when I had looked up the definition of compassion, it really goes into relieving others' suffering, it says. And I'm like, well,
Hmm.
that's interesting because that's that nursing mindset. And really having compassion for yourself is totally different. And it's surrendering to your pain, it's surrendering to your situations and circumstances that you can either judge yourself or look deeper and find love for yourself and move from there. And I went into this whole thing with her, but yeah, Maria, you want to go?
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, and when Sam actually just mentioned to me before we started hitting record about what we wanted to talk about, she told me how her client asked her that. And I was like, wow, that's weird. I've never, kind of like Sam, I've never really asked myself the definition because, again, it was always sort of something I felt. Um, but then I sat there for a second and pondered, and I was like, what is compassion actually? So I heard in my head, it's giving and sharing from a heart centered space, right? But that also means to yourself. Because as nurses, we were, what I feel, we had like programmed compassion. Because now that I'm learning this sort of self love, self care, self compassion, and in turn having almost a different energy of compassion towards other people, I realized the compassion or even empathy that I had as a nurse. Not to say there wasn't some aspect of it that was real, right? But a lot of it is programmed. So much of it is programmed. And that is why we see so many healthcare providers burnt out because compassion should actually empower us and like fulfill us and like amplify our energy. And instead, when we're in these positions, whether it's a healthcare provider, whether it's public safety, police, military, all of these like service to humanity type jobs, we like have this programmed compassion, this programmed. I hate to say it, but it's like this sort of martyr program, right? Where we're literally putting everybody else before us. So as nurses, I mean, we are literally taught, programmed, and expected to take on quite a heavy assignment of patients and maybe not even have time to pee during the day. Certainly not have time to take breaks to eat. Like that, that's few and far between. So when you really look at that and, oh yeah, we have all this compassion for our patients, but like we are suffering inside. We, the providers, the healthcare providers, are literally suffering and putting ourselves on the back burner. And then when you really start to understand energy, at least for me, it's like then I'm going home and taking that energy home to my loved ones. That energy of like, I'm burnt out. I've now taken on the energy of my clients, and now I'm going home with all of that energy, and then don't even know how to show up for myself. Don't even know how to have compassion for myself. And for me, like when I was told that I was an empath a couple of years ago, it was empowering and disempowering at the same time because it helped me to explain why I had sort of absorbed so much over the years. So it gave me like the why to some of my suffering, but then it also kind of gave me another excuse in a way, or another reason to continue to kind of take on people's stuff, even still being aware of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was like empowering and disempowering. It's like, oh, here's why you've created all of these mental, emotional, and physical diseases, because you're an empath and you absorb everybody. And it's like, oh, great, wasn't my fault. And then it's like, oh, well, learning to be an empowered empath, it's like, yeah, I'm learning how to protect my energy. And protecting my energy really means having this new level of self-care and self-love and self-compassion. And it's so weird to think that like this is something I have to practice daily, like that it's not a natural thing. And it's really just helped me to recognize like how deep our programs are. And I think I've talked about it probably in other videos. If not, I've definitely talked about it with many of my clients, that we're all sort of programmed to take care of others, and it distracts us from our own stuff. And oftentimes when we're helping other people, if you really start to look at the people that either you give advice to, or that are seeking your help, or just the people that you're kind of going above and beyond for, if you really start to break it down, they have a lot of the same issues, traumas, things that we do. But it's always easier to kind of outsource our energy to the people out there that we love instead of ourselves. But this creates a very toxic and suffering energy inside of us, because then it's like we eventually get to like a breaking point, a melting point, a boiling point, right? Everybody's is different, but we eventually get there, and then we're like, nobody's taking care of me. Like, where's everybody that's supposed to be taking care of me? And I mean, I say this because literally every client that comes to me comes with this sort of same mental mindset paradigm of like, I'm the one that does it all and nobody takes care of me. So it's clearly a collective issue that we all carry. So it's just interesting. The more I can kind of wake up to these programs inside of me, it's very obvious in everybody else that I work with and that I come in contact with, like how our jobs have literally become our identity. Like they really have, no matter what job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we don't even know what that self-compassion or that self-care is, we're in a state of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And something, I can't exactly the words you just said, but like, how do I go home and now take care of myself? Like, how do I, right? Like, how do you have a boundary doing that? And how do I'm so used to being service to other people. How do I now being service to myself? And it comes down, the words that kept coming through was forgiveness and patience.
Mm-hmm.
That it's like the majority of us are in these programs, and there's no like, it's like, yeah, have patience, but it's like you're basically pushed to go, go, go,
Right.
go. Like how do you even, what is patience? Like, right? And I don't mean like patience in a hospital. I mean the state of being patience.
Yeah.
And when we can have patience where it's that moments of pause and being like, whoa, this doesn't feel good, or what am I doing, or wow, like my heart's breaking for that person. It's like you want to save them, but when you take a moment to have patience or pause, it's like you know that you can't save them, but you can send them love because you're understanding that they're also suffering, because you can pause and feel that you're suffering too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the forgiveness comes in, because we cannot, and we're not meant to, but society programs us to think we are, to save everybody else and to do everything else outside. And the last thing we are taught is to look inside. And I will give the pandemic a great thing because it's caused many people to look inside.
Correct.
Many people. And it's allowed many communities for us to come together like this and really see like what is happening in the world, but really what's happening in my world that doesn't feel good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything that doesn't feel good and we witness that, that's where we give ourselves compassion because we're acknowledging our feelings and our emotions. And rather than beating ourselves up for, I remember I used to go into work and like thought I could save everybody. Like, and Maria's very good at being like, you're playing the nurse role again. I'm like, no, shit. Right. But I'm very aware that I'm doing it, but it's like, so programmed. Right?
It is. It is.
But this brought me to the thing. But I remember going into so many rooms and leaving there and be like, all right, if I just do this, this will help them, make them feel better. If I just, maybe I'll do, it's like, oh, when I look back, like I was coming from a state of compassion, but then I was coming from a state of like, I can't even help myself, so all I can do is help everybody. Like, but I wasn't helping anybody. I was, right? Because you're there, but like from that, like that heart center that Maria's talking about. It doesn't mean that Maria and I didn't like our jobs. It's not what we're saying. It's that we didn't have any time to pause and forgive ourselves for, how do I say this? Like there was points where I was like, if only I was there more, maybe they wouldn't have died in suffering, right? Or maybe they could have provided them more comfort. Like there was so many coulds and shoulds. And when we sit and pause and look at the coulds and shoulds, whether we're in service to others or with ourselves, that's where our forgiveness, we need to forgive ourselves for those coulds and shoulds because that's showing ourselves compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not taught to pause in any healthcare or military, police, teacher. We're not taught pause. We're not taught forgiveness. We're taught you should forgive that person. Well, what if I don't want to forgive them? Like, what if I need to forgive something within me that allowed whatever action or allowed me to react? Like, that's what I need to forgive. What was rooted in me that made me feel less than by whatever happened externally. Mm-hmm. But we're not taught that. And the more we can pause and slow down, that's where the compassion comes in. Because it's like, wow, I'm showing myself some fucking love. Like, wow. Wow. Like it's like a whole new level of what compassion is. Right?
Yep. Oh, 1,000%. Couldn't agree more with everything you just said. Because I feel like as you and I are still learning our own self-compassion, it's like we were taught these things in nursing school, compassion, empathy, right? But now that I like understand energy, you can't really be taught to be an energy. It's just you either carry that energy or you don't. So we're like taught these weird ways of being compassionate, being empathic, right? And that is truly part of the nurse role. We're compassionate, and I hate to say it, and I know I've said it in that other video I think we made about healthcare workers. Nursing was the most toxic environment I've ever worked in. So it's like I really started to see kind of the hypocrisy that we're like sort of praised as like this most trusting, caring, compassionate profession. And being in the profession, it did not feel that way at all. Like I'm speaking from my experience, it did not feel that way. It felt very cutthroat. There was not a lot of camaraderie amongst the nurses where I worked. And it's really because we were all just burnt out, right? And, you know, working overtime, picking up shifts, like again, like almost like throwing ourselves into work. I know for me, I was somebody that is totally guilty for that. Like, and I don't want to use the word guilty because whatever, that's another energy, that guilt and shame that are just causing us to not want to have compassion for ourselves. It's insane how when we start to actually practice this for ourselves, how much guilt comes up. Like when you actually put yourself first, you have all these weird, at least I do, all these weird feelings of like guilt. And it's like, this is so absurd that like I would feel guilty for putting me first, but that's not how we have been conditioned as humans to be. That's considered selfish, right? And I think it was Phil Good's video the other day, one of his videos, he talked about that. And he's like, actually putting yourself first is one of the most selfless things that you can do for humanity. And I'm recognizing that more and more every day. It's not easy to do. But as I learn it, that's when I really started recognizing that the way we were taught compassion in healthcare is you can't fake energy. So although we'd be at work and you have certain aspects of your job, you have to sit with, you have to sit with dying patients sometimes. You have to sit with families. That's part of the role. So, even if you are not up to par, you have to suck it up and deal with some of the worst case scenarios for what people are going through. And so if we're not like coming at it from what I call like a heart-centered space, because now that I start to actually serve others from that space, it feels so different to me. It feels so different than when I was a nurse and serving other people. Like it's a completely different, it doesn't feel like work anymore, because it's almost like the energy that I'm putting towards myself is just pouring out, and that is what's actually serving humanity. It's not even that I necessarily have to be doing all the time, right? That's the other program of nurses and that we have to be like doing all of these acts to actually be, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Contributing to society, right? Like you have to be doing all the time. Like, and if you don't have some sort of action or some sort of physical something to validate it, then you're not actually helping, right? And to me, it's actually kind of the opposite now. I'm recognizing, because it's our energy. It is our energy is what helps society. It's what helps others. So I know Sam and I've talked about it before, but this holding space, like that is to me the most compassionate thing that we can do for another human and for ourselves. And even though that's part of the nursing role, none of us have time to do it. Nobody has time to actually sit there and hold space in the way that I'm learning how to hold space for myself and other people. It's like, oh, you're lucky if you can hold 5 minutes for somebody in most nursing and most healthcare jobs. So it's that holding space, and it's because by sitting there and holding space when somebody is in a suffering state, and if you can legitimately sit there and just, you're not trying to fix them, heal them, save them, pull them out of their emotions, change them, you're literally just providing them that safe space for them to break down. That's where healing really happens. It's in that suffering state. But a lot of us have a really hard time being able to hold space because we are energetic beings, we are empaths, and we can feel people. So really what I've learned is that we like to try to get people out of their suffering because it makes us uncomfortable. Sometimes it doesn't even have to really necessarily do with them, but it's like, oh my God, I just want them to be okay because they're affecting me, right? So there's so many like little programs within programs as to why we do certain things. At least that's what I'm learning for myself. And when I can really like step back and recognize how powerful that holding space for somebody, and Sam did it for me about a week and a half ago, and it was like, that's all I needed. That's literally all. There was nothing she could say or do that was going to pull me out of what I was going through. But just her being on the other end while I broke down, that's literally all I needed. And it was the most compassionate thing that she could have done for me. And it's doing the same thing for ourselves, that every time we need to break down or whatever, can we just sit with ourselves and allow ourselves to be that way without judging, I shouldn't be thinking this, I shouldn't be feeling like this. It's all just energy. And so if you're thinking it or feeling it, then you're carrying it. So think it or feel it, because the more you try to like shove it aside, it just causes disease. take it from somebody who knows.
Makes sense. And I love that you touched upon like it makes us uncomfortable when because we want to like stop people from suffering. And there's so many times where I would hear people be like, "It's okay." I've never once told a patient it's okay
Yeah.
because it's not fucking okay. It's not.
Right.
What
Right.
you're feeling, I'm not gonna push. It's not okay. What you're going through. So like express what you're feeling. And I remember I worked on a my last job. I worked on a beautiful floor where like there actually was a lot of camaraderie. Like people came together as a team. Like I would never be able to work on another floor. Let's just say that because of the unity there because we were all in suffering together, but we all showed up together, which is like very rare, very
Yes.
fucking rare. But we were all also very hurting. And that's why my eyes were like whoa when I left there, like how much we were suffering. And when I just remember people would be like, "It's okay, like shh, it's okay, like don't cry." It's like no, you gotta cry. You gotta let the energy out.
Mm-hmm.
If and we've mentioned this too in videos, if people when someone is saying to you it's okay, that's not holding space because that's disempowering that what they're feeling. It's like what you're feeling is not it's really not that big deal. It's okay. It's like you're belittling their emotions and what they're going through.
Yeah.
What I go through, what Maria goes through is not the same. Yeah, we understand each other, but we might feel it, experience it differently. And that's why you just hold space because just like pain, my pain is not the same as someone else's pain. I could stub my toe and someone else could act like they just broke their toe. And I'm like, it's fine. Right? When we stop comparing ourselves to other people with their circumstances and their situations, that's also showing others compassion, but most importantly, you.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're no longer, it's funny because like going back to like it's okay, right? That's pushing
Gas-
aside
it's gaslighting.
gaslighting, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, gaslighting. And it's also like, for instance, today, guys, I woke up and I wasn't feeling, it was very not feeling good, dizzy, all this stuff. Something moved through me and it was very unpleasant. Kevin, like Maria's done for me many times and I've done for her, he was with me and just held space, like as I was crying and didn't know what was going on. But he showed compassion for me without doing anything. And I wasn't judging what was happening. I just let whatever it was move through me and I cried and I shook and I convulsed but I let it move through me and I trusted that it was moving because I know that energy just moves. And I showed compassion for myself without being like, what the fuck? Like, did I say what the fuck? Yes, because I was like, what was that? But did I get mad at myself for whatever it was that wanted to move through me? No. And it goes back to when I found out that I had the cancer. I feel like that's where we got a new layer of compassion, a deeper understanding of compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were both out of the hospital then, and I placed my hands on me, and I was like, rather than rejecting or denying or allowing so much fear and worry to come over when I was told that I had cancer, I was like, you know what? How can I like how can I look at this differently? How can I love whatever this is? But it's energy. Cancer is energy, right? That might trigger people, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
All illness is.
Mm-hmm.
And when I realized, and it also like with Maria um, healing and a bunch of her illnesses and autoimmune disease, I was like, I can do this. Like, and I've always known I could do if it came down, and it came down to it. But like, because no fake, no, you know. So, anyways, but me going in and connecting, and rather than being like, oh, fuck that, or in fear, I'm like, all right, what do you want to show me? Like, how can I love you? Like, how do you want to be loved? What do you want me to know? Connecting with your physical body is like that is like ultimate form of showing yourself compassion, because you're showing yourself love when we're taught that love is outside of ourselves. And when we can connect to our body, even if it doesn't feel like everything's okay, right? But when we can connect to our body and listen, like truly freaking listen to our body, we're like, okay, all right. And you learn a different level of healing, patience for yourself, forgiveness, compassion, all of these words and emotions that you're never taught the true meaning of it, because when we feel guilt, it's because we basically, like, we feel like we didn't do good enough, right?
Hmm.
And like, what's the radar of good enough?
Yep.
We determine it based on society. And if we've ever done something and someone's like, that was stupid, you looked like an idiot, well, they're not showing me compassion, that's fine. But am I taking that in and being like, oh my God, I'm not good enough, right? Or am I pausing and being like, well, that's your opinion, I think I'm good enough, right? Because we're not taught that we're good enough, that we're already whole when we're born. We're taught that we're broken.
Yep. 100%. That's why, like, literally every reading and healing I do, and especially lately, it's all surrounding this self-worth, this, yeah, a lot of it, a lot of the themes coming up lately are lack of self-worth, really. And it's something, as it could be an incident just as simple as what you just said. But all those experiences add up. Like, as you were just saying, like, you do something and somebody's like shames you for it, like, that was stupid. Like, it could be something that simple that causes a trauma in us. Like, this is where people, like, I still feel like, don't understand trauma. But it's like something that simple could cause a trauma for somebody, right? Like, and again, because we're all different, we process things differently, we take things differently. It all depends on our own level of self-awareness, where we're at. But somebody that is very low self-esteem could take that on and then hear it 50 other times after that, and that just keeps, all they keep hearing is they're not good enough, they'll never be good enough, they're not good. That's all that their subconscious is hearing. So in turn, we create all of these energies of, like, lack of self-worth, lack of self-confidence. And we don't think we have these energies, but, like, every single one of us does, because we've all been shamed at some point. That is part of the human condition. I hate to say it, but we've all been shamed, blamed, and it a lot of times happened when we were kids. And then as we become adults, like, it's like patterned, but it pretty much always stems something from childhood. And really, I feel like Sam does a good job explaining, like, what trauma is, but to me it's really just any time that you feel unsafe, right? Whether it's mentally, physically, or emotionally, you feel unsafe based on some experience that has happened to you. So now your ego comes in to protect you, and either it blocks out the whole memory altogether, or it creates its own little story around it to make you feel comfortable. Like, it's very crafty, this ego of ours, because it's living in fear and it's trying to protect us. So anytime you feel unsafe, and I've actually talked to a couple coaching clients recently about, like, safety, and everybody immediately goes to, like, physical safety, because that's just what we think safety is. Like, am I physically going to get hurt? But it's so much deeper than that. We all feel unsafe showing our emotions. Otherwise, we wouldn't be so in such a unconscious suffering state. If we all felt safe to talk about, like, our thoughts and our emotions, we would not be as asleep as we are as a collective, right? So that tells me that we're all feeling unsafe to speak up and to express our emotions. So don't know why this is all coming up, but it's obviously important, because I feel like, again, we as humans are always comparing traumas, and, like Sam was saying, that's so disempowering, not to just the person you're comparing, but it's to you. It's so disempowering, whether you're comparing people, they're better or worse off than you are, it still is such a disempowering state that you're putting yourself in, because, again, you're looking at someone or something external to you, and feeding into this like illusionary separation here that we've created in this dualistic earth plane game.
Earth plane game. I love it.
Earth plane game.
I think you define trauma wonderfully because trauma is anything that makes us feel emotionally dysregulated. It makes us feel unsafe. And you're completely right about people are like when I share like, hey, I'm seeing a 5-year-old you do this. I'm seeing a 7 and a 14. They're like, yeah, I don't have any trauma. And I'm like, well, okay. Because trauma can be just as simple as someone shaming you. It could be, which I've made a reference to before, like you hearing a bunch of like people screaming and you're having fun, but it's like, oh my God, like what's going on over it? It distracts you from your fun and it's going into your space, your aura, your sacred energy field. Anything, even if it doesn't happen to you, if there's something in your environment that doesn't, it's like, whoa, that can cause a trauma because there's an energy there.
Yep.
And a lot of things from childhood is, which I feel like in the future it's going, or whatever you believe the future is, um, anyways,
In linear time, anyways.
future,
We'll just keep it at that.
in higher dimension, 5D Earth, whatever. I feel like um, communication is going to shift because when we're children, like Maria and I's age, and then like, but our parents, it was very much like, yeah, you're right. You don't show emotions, or it's like, don't cry, suck it up, come on. Good girls don't do that. Like, oh, you want to be a bad boy? It's like, but what defines a good girl and a bad boy, or a bad boy, good, right? Or good boy, whatever. Um, and it's these like, I just lost track. Spirits coming in with a whole other thing for me to share with you guys. But anyways, it comes in
Love
with
that.
when you're okay, you're with authority, you're with people that are older than you that you're supposed to listen to, right? And they say something that like you're young, you're just developing, you don't know what good or bad is, but it's when the authority or the older people are like, see, that's a bad boy, like that's a bad girl. So now you're judging and comparing,
Yep.
right? And it's like, oh, so I shouldn't do that, but they look like they're having fun. But it's like it's more so an inconvenience to older people, but it's also they weren't taught any different either.
Right.
So it's it's really hard when you're doing these like shadow works and you're shadow works when you're going deep within and you're doing a lot of inner child. It is one of the most empowering and healing things for yourself and those who raised you to go back and look at that situation, take like a bird's eye view and be like, oh wow, like they're also coming from a wounded place. They're doing the best they can. They're scolding me, but they don't even know like that. They don't even know how they're making me feel because they're also coming from a wounded place, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you can forgive that situation and you can forgive yourself and forgive them from that situation, and one of the best ways to do it is to imagine yourself saying everything you wish you did at that time to them and hearing from them everything you wish you heard rather than like them scolding you or whatever. You can actually heal those, but that's another story. Um, but we're not doing regressions here. Um, but when you can look at that and you show, would it be humility or something? Like you show that love for that situation, that is so healing. Like, cause that's so freaking healing because you are looking at the situation differently. You're no longer taking it personal.
Right.
And when we can learn to not take things personal, it's like game changer. I am free. Like I don't care. And one of the biggest things I've learned since leaving the hospital, because I've always been someone who people think like, you don't care, you just say what's on your mind. True. But I didn't realize the energy of which that speaking truth was coming from, and it was coming from very wounded parts in me that I didn't have to share, or I didn't have to act that way, or I didn't have to stand in that way. It was like I was trying to either prove something, get acceptance or stop a bullying or something. It was not coming from authentic heart-centered place because I didn't know I didn't know. And now, and that's that guilt Maria was talking about, like, oh crap, like acted like that, or like, oh, I could change that situation or whatever. And it's forgiving that. It's like, well, you know what? I didn't know any better.
Right.
That happened. And then release that. That's surrendering. Surrendering to that and being like, I am like, I forgive myself. I am love. Like I'm happy. And the more you can do that, it like rewires and your ego and conditioned self's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're becoming more aligned with love. Whoa, not safe.
Whoa, bro.
Bro. And it's like, no, we're safe. We're safe. Because just like Maria and I have said, there's two main like emotions or whatever, fear and love, right? Which have trickled down of things that are in love and what's in fear. Anything that disempowers our love or doesn't feel loving, that's fear and that's unsafe. Anything that is loving and feels good, that's safe. So trauma, that's what I was getting into, trauma. Duh. Trauma is anything that's has caused a fear in you that has made you feel unsafe. So when Maria and I talk about traumas, it's like, okay, you stubbed your toe. To you, that's a trauma. For you being in an area where people are screaming, that can be a trauma. For you seeing a death, that's a trauma. Being a nurse and having people die all the time and have to go to each room and pretend you're okay, that's trauma. And we are not taught how to deal with trauma because in the DSM or mental illness or whatever, it's like, oh no, trauma is this, or only veterans have PTSD. It's like they have a different type of PTSD, right? They have a different type of post-traumatic syndrome. I won't even call it disorder because it's like basically a state of being now for all of us.
The entire human collective has PTSD.
Right? Because
Yep.
we don't know truly that love is within us, that we're not separated from any divinity. We are just, we think that we are.
Yep.
And, oh, never mind. Spirit's like, don't go down that rabbit hole. So I'll do that later. Look at him stopping me. See,
They're
when
so
you're
good. They're so good.
And I'm going to use this example because a lot of times, like Maria said, our physical environment safe, right? Which is beautiful. Because that's where you feel safe doing healing. But who you live with, do they feel safe with you when you share? Are they actively listening to you when it's like you're like, listen, I just need to vent and get this out. If you can't, that's a sign that you still don't feel safe. It doesn't mean because you don't feel safe around that person because they're a bad person.
Right.
It means that something in you doesn't feel safe to be heard.
Yep.
That is trauma. And that's why labels distort everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I was doing a reading right before we got on this call, and Spirit works in wonderful ways, because she was asking about her, like a relationship in the linear future. And I was shown a gentleman coming in, and I remember saying to her, he is so safe. And I was smiling and like pretty much crying because I said to her, I was like, it's not that he provides you safe environment. Like his energy to you is so safe that he supports you, and I'm seeing you like fly. And it's like this, it's like something you've never had before. I'm saying this to her. I was like, and it almost feels uncomfortable at first because this gentleman who's coming is literally like a cheerleader for you, yet a protector, a provider, a cuddler. This is safe. He's like a safe relationship for you. And you can share anything. And then Spirit was like, it's almost like he's a stay-at-home dad, but like not, because he provides, like, you go out, you can do your thing and trust like everything's still taken care of. Like that's safe, but he's also, they showed me, he doesn't sacrifice his well-being to provide for you. He's also doing his own thing, but he's supporting you, and I see it a very mutual, loving relationship. Like you, and I kept saying compassion. There's a lot of compassion there. And she was like, "Oh, that sounds beautiful," and I'm like, "It is," because I'm watching it. And
Like it
it,
is.
it ethers. I'm watching it, and I'm like, "Wow!" Like it just brought another level of like what safe is, right? And like hospitals, for instance, they're not safe,
No.
right? You
Nope.
have people all the time coming in, and we only really use, there's a lot of places that people work that aren't safe, right? But we only use hospitals because we know it. And if you're a patient, it's like everyone that's coming in, yes, they have good intentions, they're doing their job, their roles, whatever. But it's like you're constantly like, "Are you sick? How do you feel today? Oh, you don't feel that anymore?" It's like, well, I don't know, do I? Like that's not safe. If you think about it, that's causing more trauma. It's like, well, I'm having a really good day. Well, just remember last time, this happened after a couple of days. Like, oh God, so it's probably gonna happen again. It's like that's not safe. That's not showing compassion. That's not. Yes, let's celebrate that you feel great today. Yes, right.
Yep.
It's disempowering you, and I'm not saying all, but like anything that brings you from a state of joy and out of that, that's a trauma because you're not feeling safe and you're dysregulated. And it roots down to certain fears. So that's what I'll say about trauma. Long story.
Oh, look
Or
at you.
short story long. Whatever.
Aren't our stories always that way?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
just no way to short and sweet most of the stuff we talk about, but that's all right. That's it. This stuff is not meant to be short and sweet.
Mm.
I'm just trying to like go back to because a couple of things you said. So, well, I loved that you shared like about your throat chakra because Sam and I have different, we'll say, throat chakra imbalances, where she's recognizing like a lot of her expression came from like a wounded state, right? My suppression came from a wounded state. So now like I'm learning this like healthy balance of actually being able to use my voice and realize that it's actually still love because I have this sort of skewed perspective that sometimes when I'm speaking up for myself that, and it sounds crazy, but it's just how the trauma manifested in me and how I perceived it all. But it's like I have this sort of perception that I'm being like aggressive like to people, right? So I've like worked at really being able to start to express this, but stay in a heart space. And it's like it's not an easy thing because sometimes I can also now recognize I'm being overly expressive and still, like what Sam's saying, come from a wounded place because it feels different in my body. Like it's the best way I can describe it is when these things happen, it feels very different. Like even as the words are coming out, it feels different in my body when it's actually coming from a heart space versus if I'm reacting or coming from trauma, wounds. It feels usually like my stomach will get tight when I'm coming from what I would say like an ego reaction and it doesn't feel comfortable. Now, because I'm still learning how to use it, I won't say that it doesn't feel uncomfortable to use it. It does, but it's a completely different energy because I know what's coming out of my mouth is still it's coming from a compassionate place. It's not coming from that wounded victim mindset kind of thing. But that's like discernment of energy. That's still just learning how these energies feel inside of us because just like Sam was saying, like everything has been labeled and then labeled again and labeled again. And so then all these labels have what society says they are. So just like I said, we were taught compassion as nurses. You can't be taught how to be an energy. You can't. You can be taught how to do acts of kindness. You can be taught how to have behaviors that put other people first. But that doesn't mean that you as the human is actually doing it from an authentic place. And so those two things feel very differently. So the compassion that I had in the nursing field is very different than the compassion I'm having now for both myself and my clients. Like I can see how I am much more present for my clients than I ever was as a nurse. And again, I could blame that all on the fact that, you know, we didn't have time, but I still could have been more present when I was there. Like, I say that not in a judgmental way. It's just I did the best I could when I knew what I knew. You know what I mean? It's not like looking back and now judging myself for how I was. Like Sam's saying, it's like I'm looking back and observing, whoa, like how I would do things so differently now, knowing what I know about energy. I mean, it's for me, like the more I just really like understand energy, it changes my whole perspective of like even just the littlest things that I do throughout the day, because I pause for a second and go, what's actually driving that behavior? What's actually driving me to do that? What is the true intention? Because again, intention, we think our ego has an intention, right? Our ego has intention, but so doesn't higher self. And so when we start to talk about intention with clients and people, like every human walks around and says, oh, I never have bad intentions to hurt. Like we don't, like we're not intending to hurt other people, the majority of us, right? But we still do it. And again, it goes back to having these unconscious, unacknowledged traumas that are causing us to behave in certain ways. And then we create certain patterns of ways of being. And so then we hurt people. But the conscious intention wasn't to hurt people. But when you start to even break down intention, that's what I'm talking about, like the energy that's actually behind it. Like what is causing me to pick up my phone right now? Why do I feel like I need to look at something right now? You know, like something as simple as that. But those are the things that are so programmed into us that you don't even consciously realize that how many times a day you look at your phone. And I'm just using that as an example because I've both my phones sitting right next to me, and so, you know, we're in the age of technology. Sam and I are both millennials, so we grew up with these devices like, you know, everywhere. And then the generations after us even more so. So it's like recognizing all of those little things that you do throughout your day that you start to realize are so programmed in the sense that like you're still in this like very unconscious kind of loop of like, I'm still like being unconsciously controlled by my subconscious mind that is holding on to all these things. And I liked that you brought, because you have said it in another video, but such a good example when you brought up trauma and how it can be something like happening in your environment close by. And I'm glad you brought that up again because it's true. Because our brain cannot discern actual trauma if it's happening to us, or if we're watching it in a movie, or if we're reading it in a book, or if it's happening in the room next to us, or if it's happening to like one of our loved ones. Our brain doesn't discern, oh, that wasn't really you. It literally just takes on the experience. So then eventually your emotion mirrors that experience and your body holds on to it. So it may never have been your trauma, but you've now taken it on as your trauma. And this is why I say as humans, we have so much unacknowledged trauma in our bodies still, because if you don't even realize that that's how it happens, then there's so much. And I'm not saying this to instill fear like, oh my God, no, it's just acknowledging that we're all walking around with a lot of it. Like it's part of the human condition, it's part of the game. But until we allow ourselves to have compassion for ourselves, to be able to see these traumas without judgment, with being able to see from both lenses, like Sam was saying, from the perpetrator and from the victim, and realize that you're just both mirroring the same wound. That's where you start to have this level of forgiveness, because forgiveness is another thing that you can't fake. Like you can't just one day, I'll just forgive it. Like, I mean, you can try to tell yourself that, but if the energy of forgiveness isn't really in you, then you're just like trying to convince yourself of something that you don't really feel yet. And forgiveness, sometimes it takes time because, again, there's so many layers of these traumas, these wounds that we have, that it's a process, and it's being patient with ourselves as we navigate it, because there's no right or wrong way to do this. There's no fast track to doing this. Like everybody is going to navigate this awakening process, this evolution process, whatever you want to call it, the healing process. We're all going to navigate it very differently because we process things differently. But the one thing that we all very much have in common is that we all still have the same emotions and a lot of the same thoughts because we're all programmed by the same systems and we're all mirroring each other. So that's where I can really have compassion for people. It's like in a whole new way than this sort of like fake programmed compassion into me. Like now I have like legitimate compassion when I work with different people and hearing their like walks of life. It's like very humbling and very eye-opening. And it's like, oh my God, no wonder why we're all like still walking around hurting each other. And so it makes my like heart open up even more to humanity, even the worst of the worst people. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to understand. But like the darkness, the evil, like it is craving, it's fearing love, but it's craving it at the same time because it knows that that's what's going to set it free. Like, and just like our own shadows, it's craving being illuminated. It's our shadows are craving to come to the surface to be set free. But it is a process, my friends.
Deep,
It's a process.
long process. Because once you get to one layer, it's like, oh, I thought I handled that. It's like, yeah, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. And I feel like when we, but it's funny, and in the readings or sessions with people, I'm always like, yep, they just want you to have more compassion, more forgiveness, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, well, how do we start doing that? What is that, right? Like, so compassion is another layer of self-love and pausing and looking at observing rather than taking things personal, right? Like it's, so how do you step into this state of compassion when you've been living in like, didn't know that you weren't in compassion, right? And I feel like it comes down to understanding that maybe you don't have healthy boundaries. Maybe your relationships there's some toxicity. Maybe it's like looking at different facets in your life and being like, well, one of these is actually like really bothering me. Like what parts of my life are like unsettling? And it's like choosing one thing and then being like, okay, well, how can I make a shift in this? And one of these examples is coming through with, because we both mentioned the throat chakra. But I'm just gonna
just gonna.
say, when I left my job, I had to have even more tougher conversations with myself, but also with people in my life that I didn't think I'd have to have a tough conversation with. And what I mean by a tough conversation is owning my truth and really listening and coming from my heart and standing up for how I'm feeling and realizing I do not control, nor can I control how someone else reacts, responds, or receives anything I do or say, because we cannot please the world. And that's going back to the feel good thing. We can only please ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we are doing a disservice to everybody if we're allowing ourselves to bend over backwards and succumb to everything else and be like, well, that I don't feel good about that, but I'm just going to play along because that makes you happy. It's like that is one of the worst things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know that. And I had to have I had one in particular that's coming through. I felt left out. I felt because I just gone through a huge thing and I was PTSD and I felt left out. I felt like, wow, like I felt discarded. And I was like, why do I feel this way? Like, why do I feel this way? And so I wanted to say something to my friend who I felt like, hey, why wasn't I included in this? Like, whatever. We've always done this thing together. And I was beating myself up over it. I was like, you know what? Let me just breathe and pause and be like, am I wrong by saying something? Am I using my throat chakra wrong by saying something? Am I coming from a wounded place or am I genuinely like hurt? And I want to share that with her because I thought that our bond was stronger, right? And I had spent so many relationships and friendships where I didn't say anything just to like keep the peace. And I realized that wasn't right. That was hurting me. And so I was like, you know what? How do I say this with compassion? How do I say this without coming from like, I'm mad at you? Because I wasn't mad at her. I was trying to understand the situation
Yep.
and why I was feeling something. And it took me a lot to text her and share with her, this is how I am feeling. I feel left out. I don't feel like you did this intentionally. I'm just letting you know this is where I'm coming from. Wasn't received well at all. But damn, did it lift this like, because I finally was like, you know what? I'm tired of like allowing myself to play small because I don't want to piss anybody off. Because,
Yep.
right? Because in the past, I would say things, but like the energy of like anger was in it. And this one was actually like, I'm trying to like understand. I'm trying to love myself here, and I'm confused. And so the message, wasn't shaved. The friendship's not the same sense, but I don't regret that message because what I would have regretted is not doing it because I would have carried with me that feeling of that I had. And I was like, I am worth sharing how I'm feeling and my truth because I know that it's not coming from, maybe it's coming from a wounded place, like initially, right? Because it's like I felt the pain, but it's like, no, it wasn't.
No, it's not. It's not. It's coming from an authentic place
Yeah.
about how you were feeling about a situation.
Thank you.
That's why it felt different to you after you did it. There was no, it was like, oh, it felt like a weight had come off of you because it was like, and that's what I was talking about before about how like it feels different in my body when I know I'm coming from a wounded place versus when I'm actually coming from my heart because it literally feels like 10 gajillion pounds have been lifted off your shoulders or pulled out of your stomach, however you want to. But it's like, versus like if I am knowing that I'm reacting, it like that does not feel good to me while I'm doing it or afterwards. It's like, okay. And again, it's not to judge it's being aware like, okay, just slipped into my human again and like, got it type of thing. But yes, it feels very different. And that's why to me, like what you're saying, like no, 100% wasn't coming. No, you were acknowledging how you felt about a situation that in the past you normally wouldn't have done that for yourself.
Mhm. Yeah. Or I would have later been like, yeah, well, you didn't fucking invite me to that. So,
Right, you would have said it in a way like that was, yes. Yep.
and rather than, and also I was getting angry at the situation. I realized like, this isn't, if I don't say something, I'm going to have anger. And I don't want that in me. I'm
Correct.
an angry person. And I was like, I don't want that in me. So I shared my truth. Sharing your truth is expressing how you're feeling, but it's doing it by first you pausing and like looking at yourself and being like, how do I feel? How do I genuinely feel here? And then that's showing yourself that compassion, that love. And even though, the situation fizzled, the friendship fizzled, I don't regret anything about any of it because I was showing love to myself and I wasn't coming from anything else, nor was I trying to hurt anybody.
Right.
And that's setting a boundary for yourself. And it's one of the hardest things to do is to pause, breathe, look at how you're feeling. And like Maria said, feel it in your body and then share it. Don't just like share it because you're like in the moment, but like,
Right.
hmm, huh,
Right.
and share it and know that no matter how it is picked up, it's not it drop it from there. Like it's not, and don't be like, don't apologize either. Ooh.
I know.
I know that's hard. That's hard, right?
That's really hard.
That's
It's
really
really hard.
we apologize.
And that comes from guilt. That comes from that beautiful energy guilt again that I was mentioning before. But I say this as somebody that's been literally a chronic apologizer my entire life. And learning to set boundaries and speak from this space now, I still feel like I have to apologize. And it is so annoying.
Right? Right?
Because I know enough to know that that's still guilt that I have, right? Like, for loving myself. Like, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's extremely challenging. And I mean, I yell at my clients. I don't yell at them, but I'm firm with them because a lot of them do the same thing. Like they're me. Like they're apologize. I'm sorry, I'm reaching out to you. I tell my clients they can reach out to me, and it will start off with, I'm sorry to bother you. It's like, oh my God, that's me. Oh my God, that's me. There's the chronic apologizer again. So it's like I'm trying to break them of it before they keep falling further into the habit that I am still trying to break. But yeah, it's yeah, when you said that, like, don't apologize. It's true, because if you are coming from that heart space, there's no reason to apologize, right? Like, yes, if you have reacted and like own your shit 1,000%, but it's different when you're just learning to like use your voice or learning new ways of being that actually do feel freeing and self-loving. Those are the times you don't want to go and apologize, because you're still kind of like beating yourself up. And so you're still not really honoring that self-love. Like you're doing it, but then you're like kind of pulling it back again.
Yeah.
It's like I just saw, like, that's how they just showed it to me. It's like they're like, you're in it, and then you're like, oh, let's pull that out again, because that felt uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ego. It's just the ego coming in and going,
Yeah. And
yeah.
that wasn't me saying, don't apologize, because I do it all the time. It's like, oh, that's important, Kate. Gotcha.
Oh no, I know. Because as soon as you said it, I was like, yes, because it's definitely still a thing for me, 1,000%. I know that. And yeah, it's like wild how much we all, and because it's a thing for me, I'm noticing it in other people so much more too. I'm like, oh my God, we're all walking around, I'm sorry. And then it doesn't even mean anything either. Like, my apologies don't even probably mean shit anymore, because I've over apologized so much. So I recognize that. It's like, I want my apologies to be genuine. I want them to come from a heart space, and owning my shit when I know that I've done something, whether it was intentional or not, right? Like, an apology shouldn't be like, well, I didn't intend to, like, just own your shit. Like, none of us are intending, right, to hurt other people. But that's another part of like the apology that I find is like, then we're like, well, it's like you're trying to explain, and that's not an apology. Like, to me, an apology is like, own your shit, say you're truly sorry from a heart space, and like, do better the next time. Like, that's an apology. That's learning from those times where you're still projecting or reacting to people. But yeah, the apology thing is still a thing. Still a thing.
I did it this morning when Kevin left. I was like with my little whatever happened. I texted him, and before I read his messages, I said, I'm sorry you had to see
Deal
that,
with that. Yeah, right.
because like I didn't even know what the hell's happening. And he goes, don't apologize for being unique and having these abilities to cross energies through. Don't apologize for being you. And I go, well, then can I at least apologize for swearing at you during it? Yes, you can. But I also know that wasn't you. And I was like, that's true. Thank you. But because I don't apologize as much anymore. I do sometimes with you because I'm like, oh, sorry. But it's like, fuck that, I'm not sorry. Like, I'm really not.
Exactly. I'm like, you take that sorry back right now. Reel that shit back in.
And also, like, so going back to like, how do you start having compassion for yourself? It's like looking at those relationships in your life. Where does it not feel great? Like, where are you feeling a lot of your energy go to, or you're doing something and after you're like, oh, like I feel kind of icky, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's when you feel icky or you feel something's off, it's because you're not in alignment with what you truly want.
Mm-hmm.
Not seeing and hearing, and like you're not listening to you. It's something outside of you. And when when you can just like sit and just be like, okay, what in that situation was icky? Where did the ickiness, like let's say you're in a group of people, where did the ickiness start? It's like, well, when I went to go talk to that person and I started gossiping. And I don't do that anymore. Well, not only were you just doing it a service to you, but you're doing a service to someone else.
Right. You're feeding that codependent need to have, yeah, because when we gossip with people, we're feeding those people with the same, like, oh, it's okay to do this. Like, it's another codependent bond.
Yeah. And a little act of compassion is, let's say, you're walking and you see someone like drop something and you're like, oh, and you just go, you're not looking for anything in return. Oh, hey, you dropped this, and you give it back. That's
Keep
awesome.
going. Give me one sec.
Okay. Sorry, we paused it and
We're
resumed.
back.
So when, let's say someone drops something, you go and you just pick it up and give it to them. That's an act of compassion. And because you're not expecting anything in return, it's just without thought. That's heart centered right there.
Yep.
Intentionally being like, oh, they dropped something. That's an inconvenience, and you don't go help them. That's also an intentional. Well, that's an intentional act of not showing compassion.
Right.
And the more we do that as a collective, the more that that's going to come into our fields. So when we allow ourselves to just like not even think about it and like you do something, that's heart-centered compassion.
Hmm.
And the second you start saying to people like, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to go out tonight. Like I just don't want to. You don't need an excuse. I don't want to go out tonight.
Yep.
Boom, that's self-compassion right there because you're owning that you don't want to go. Rather than be like, I don't want to go tonight because I have this, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just, but we all were programmed to think like,
See, we
yeah,
have to have a reason. We have to have a reason for everything.
we don't.
And I'm still living in that sort of program in my head, like that whole like, who would have thought it would be so hard to like practice? I just don't feel like doing that. Like I just don't want to. Like, but yet it is because there's that guilt that comes up. It's like that weird people pleasing, like don't want to piss anybody off, want to keep everybody in your life kind of thing. So just do whatever it is that everybody else wants to do. And then keep the peace, but really you're just brewing a storm inside because it's like it's okay to not want to do whatever it is that you don't want to do, and it's okay to do whatever it is that you want to do, but yet there's this weird thing that we hold ourselves back. And it's, yeah, it's crazy. The human condition. That's what I'm going to keep calling it. It's the human condition, and it's wild.
And when another video will be about empathy, but
Yeah.
with compassion. But I was just thinking about like, so as nurses, this isn't something we're taught to do. I feel like this is also something that you're either born with or not, or whatever. But it's like when you put yourself into other people's shoes all the time to understand their perspective, to like be open minded or to see what do they need, right? When you can do that without getting anything back, that is showing another level of compassion. And it's like when you can get where I was going with this because they were showing me a bunch of things. But it's like when you can look at somebody and see that they're struggling and suffering, rather than trying, like you said earlier, fix it or whatever, it's like, let me just take a breath and, just maybe sit by them or like put your hand on them or whatever without having to change the situation. When you can do that for other people, imagine doing that for yourself. Like being able when you're in distress and you're suffering and you're like, what the fuck? It's like, let me just breathe and kind of like imagine stepping outside of your body and looking at yourself and then step back in and be like, oh, and just like give yourself a hug. Give yourself a therapeutic touch. Love yourself. Give yourself what you would do for someone else just to help them in need. We don't there's so many like Reiki healers and other healers out there, they're energy workers that I'm like, well, did you try that on yourself? No. Why not? Why not? Like show
Yep.
yourself that love. Like
Like you're
that
doing all these sessions for other people. I know it's wild to me that I'm like, that's why I consider myself an energy healer, if you want to use labels, because I've energy healed myself, not because of what I do as the hollow bone in assisting people to receive healing energy. Like, I literally only self identify as an energy healer because I've used energy to heal myself. So it's wild to me, same thing as Sam saying, to meet different practitioners that like will do readings or whatever. And I'm like, oh, you don't do it on yourself? No, I've never tried. It's like, what?
Imagine doing it to yourself.
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable at first, right? And then you're like,
Yep.
oh yeah, come on down. Come on in, make
Hmm.
like because you're showing yourself a new level of self-love and care and nourishment.
Yes. Hmm.
And it's like, mm, it's
Hmm.
beautiful.
It is. It is.
So we will reintervene on another video on going back more into the compassion fatigue aspect.
Yes. Yeah. I think this was a good one to start with, just kind of touching upon the energy of compassion and how, we were taught a certain aspect of it in nursing, and you and I are both learning it now for ourselves, which in turn is like I legitimately feel like I've helped more people since I've started waking up than I ever did as a nurse in my career as a nurse, 1,000%. And I'm even talking about people that I may not have even physically met because I understand energy. So I know that my energy, and because I'm whatever you want, raising my vibration, whatever it is, getting rid of the excess baggage, it's energetically helping so many more people than I ever could have helped in the healthcare setting when I was still walking around in a toxic environment in my own toxic energy. Yes, the acts I was doing was helpful, but like the actual energy I was serving people with was not. And that's pretty like eye-opening. So I say that because I know there's a lot of, I say nurses because that seems to be, we get a lot of nurses that come to us. But really any healthcare, any of service to humanity type profession, but we use healthcare because that's what we were in. I say this because I know there's a lot of people coming that are like, I can't do this anymore. I'm like, I hate this job. And it's like, yeah, well, if you hate it, like that's the energy that you're actually bringing into it, and you're bringing that into your patient's room. So like it may be time to like start to reflect on what it is about it that you hate, and start to either focus on things that are positive about it to help you through, or maybe start questioning a change, because that chaos within the system is not going anywhere. It's only going to continue to ramp and amp up. So those of you that are still in it, it's going to get louder, just like it's going to get louder out there. So kind of like what you said earlier about the pandemic, it was absolutely a gift in many ways. And I'm not taking away from the fact that people suffered from that. I'm not like negating that or dismissing any of that. But I knew when it happened that it was a spiritual awakening for so many people. Like I knew it. It was a gift because it was a time for people to reflect, and then to hit the healthcare system in the way that it did. A lot of people left because they did start to see beyond the bullshit. The bullshit. The bullshit, for lack of better term. So, yes, we will definitely make a video on a little bit more geared towards the actual compassion fatigue. But
And with one final short thing is that in order to look at more of the positive things, because that's hard to do, right? Especially when you feel so drained and like you feel like you're dying inside. Like how can you fucking find anything positive, right? That's when you start looking at little things you're grateful for. The more we step into a space of gratitude, even if it's like something as little as like, or you could be like, oh, I'm so glad I got paid today. Like if it's related to job. I'm so glad that I have a car to drive today. I am so glad I had a warm bed. I am so grateful. I am so glad. I am so happy. The more you put those things out, and just like, I'm so glad I have a computer right now that I can talk to Maria when she's in Arizona. Like, I am so fucking grateful for that, right? Like, that is something to be grateful for. In my eyes, you may have other things you're grateful for, but the more you look at those and express them, the more things of happy and gratitude will come to you, that baggage, these heavy things won't feel so heavy, because you'll start to be like, wow, like there's so many other things that like that are good that are happening, but I wasn't able to see them because I was stuck in this. So that just every day start to like express a little bit of gratitude for something, anything, for pickles, clouds, whatever.
whatever, the simplest, littlest things, because those are really, Sam's right. Those are the things that start to really shift your whole perspective of everything else in your life. Like starting with those simple Um, those very, very simple acts of just looking for the things that you're grateful for. I mean, all of us have at least one thing, no matter who we are. There's one thing that we can be grateful for. And it could be literally the breath in your body because it's what's giving us life and it's what's allowing us to navigate this crazy, this crazy ride.
And I feel like gratitude is also self compassion
It is.
because
Yes,
you
it is.
out what you're grateful for externally as well as around you. So,
Yep.
like in your space.
Start being grateful for you. That's what it's all about.
Too, because you're looking at all the good things, all the grateful things, so you feel safer.
Yep. See? What a beautiful way to sum it up. Love
Yep.
yous.
Love you guys. Have a good night, morning, evening, afternoon, wherever. Love you. Bye.
Bye.